Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight, with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio, your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Howdy y'all, red-olaughlin here. Today on the USA Global TV and Radio Network, our show is called The Corner Bookstore. We feature publishers and editors and authors and anyone at all even remotely associated with the book industry, so that we can provide good awareness and information, education for authors, existing authors and new authors. So today I'm very honored, absolutely honored, because I have a good friend of mine. She lives literally here in the Houston area, same place that I do. Her name is Julie Connor, and she is not only an author, she's an award-winning author, a couple of books, and she also has her own publishing company. So Julie, please join me. Howdy.
Hi, Red. How are you?
Exceptionally well, as always. Before we get into the author part of thing, I think the people would really like to know the fact that you spent well over 30 years, 33 years, something like that, in the UN's Foreign Service as a diplomat and a couple other the Department of State and U.S. Information Agency, whatever. Anyway, you've been overseas a number of times, a lot of times. Why don't we just kind of talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll kind of ease into how you became an author and go from there. Because I'm sure that all of those diplomatic posts and things like that required some level of writing, and you probably just enhanced your skill set and kept on going.
Yes, well, if anyone looks at my author website, you'll see that I actually thought I was going to be a writer from the time I was quite young. And I got my undergraduate degrees in English and history, and then a creative writing degree from the University of Houston. And I thought I would be just a straight writer or maybe a journalist. But, things happen, life gets in the way, and I ended up joining the U.S. Foreign Service. And it turns out that writing is a skill that you have to have for the Foreign Service. You have to write lots of reports back to Washington. In my case, I was the press attaché for the embassy on a number of occasions. So I wrote press reports, I wrote speeches for the ambassador. I wrote anything you can imagine, I was writing it. So I had a lot of writing in the job always, but it was more professional writing. It wasn't so creative writing. So I did spend 33 years, the majority of it overseas at 9 different postings overseas in 7 different countries. And when I would be rotated back to Washington, I would work first at the United States Information Agency, which handled press and cultural affairs overseas. And then later, USIA was folded into the Department of State. So then I was working at the Department of State. And again, everything I did required a lot of writing, whether it's reports to and from the field in Washington, or reports to go up to the higher ups, or evaluations of programs or whatever. So I did a lot of writing, but it wasn't creative. So when I finally retired, and I thought, well, I think I'm going to go back to my first love, which is writing. And along the writing journey, I realized that the trend nowadays is to go into not with a big major publisher, but with a small publisher or even a hybrid publisher or self-publishing. So as I learned more about publishing, I thought, well, if I have to learn all this stuff myself, I might as well make it available to other people as well. So I opened a micro publishing house here in Houston. It's called Bayou City Press. For anyone who doesn't know, Houston's nickname is the Bayou City. We have 7 bayous running through Houston, which is part of the problem of our frequent flooding. But anyway, I started my publishing company right before COVID hit. So that was kind of a downer because my business plan sort of went out the window. And as a result, the first 2 books I published were actually my own books. And now I'm into publishing other people's books. So I've published 2 books by other authors.
I noticed on occasion that I hear you speaking Spanish very fluently. I'm sure that part of your overseas tours required some level of understanding and ability to speak. How did you acquire your Spanish ability?
Well, I learned Spanish in high school and I had pretty good teachers, so I got a fairly high level. I did take 1 semester of Spanish at the university, but I was working at the 3rd year level, which was basically as high as you go unless you're going to be a Spanish major. So then I didn't do it. But when I joined the Foreign Service, we have to come in with a language. So you have to test in a language. And if you don't have a language, they teach you a language. But I already had Spanish. So my Spanish was pretty good. It had gotten a little bit corrupted, I'll call it, over the years because I spent some time in Portugal. And so when I didn't know a Spanish word, I'd learn the Portuguese word. And then I spoke a kind of mishmash of Spanish and Portuguese. So I spent a month or so just cleaning up my Spanish. And then I was at what they call professional fluent level. And I was good to go. And because I did have Spanish and because it's, in my opinion, language is so important, I did spend a lot of time in Latin America speaking where I spoke Spanish. And the interesting thing, of course, is that we kind of think of Spanish as just one language, but in fact, it has a lot of different regional accents and vocabulary. So every time you move, you have to make sure that the vocabulary you use is appropriate because some words that are acceptable are used frequently in one country or unacceptable in another country. But I love speaking Spanish. I speak it every time I can just to keep my fluency going. And it's wonderful to have 2 languages.
Well, I noticed how natural you were in it when you were talking to somebody at one point in time. Whoa, pretty impressive. So anyway, you have any other languages you have minimal skills in for communication or tourism?
I get around in Spanish pretty well in Italy and even in France. They're Romance languages, so there's enough cognates that I can figure out what someone is saying. In Portuguese also, so all the Romance languages. And I have I have actually done pretty well helping other people in other countries, like in Italy, for example, who can't understand what someone is saying. I can usually understand it and do a little bit of translating. Now, my spoken version is just Spanish. And if I know the Italian word, for example, I'll substitute it, but basically I'm speaking Spanish. The interesting thing is I can do that more easily than a native of one of those languages can. For example, Spaniards claim they don't understand Portuguese at all. The sounds are so different, they'll just say, I don't know what they're saying, whereas I know what they're saying. So anyway, it's just interesting. Languages are interesting.
I spent a couple weeks over in Portugal at a military event exercise, and I'm listening to the radio going back and forth to places. And to me, it sounded like Spanish with a Russian accent. Of course, this was continental Portuguese, which is different than the Brazilian Portuguese, which is what I studied a little bit before I went over there. And I'm trying to speak to people, and they look at me. I know what I'm saying. I can read it, but they just have a problem with the interpretation of the way I'm saying things, and it is what it is. Anyway, let's
That's
get into
exactly
your.
right. That's exactly right. Brazilian Portuguese is quite different from Portuguese. The Portuguese say that they speak the correct language, and of course they do. They're the mother country. But if you talk to a Brazilian, they'll say, "Oh, we're 10 times bigger than Portugal. Who do you think? Which accent should you have, or which vocabulary should you use?" And that answer is pretty obvious too.
But let's get into your writing because you and I share something. We did it actually the same year, 2016. We both walked the Camino de Santiago. I had intentions of writing a book about it. It's still on my intention list. It's up there on my whiteboard right now. And it hasn't happened. I've written 4 or 5 other books in the meantime since that point in time. And it's still up there on my list of things to do. But you actually wrote a book on the Camino and it won awards. So let's talk about why did you choose to write about the Camino? And first of all, what is the Camino so people know? And why did you choose to write about it? And why was it your first book?
So the Camino de Santiago is an ancient pilgrimage route. It starts anywhere in the world, but it used to in the Middle Ages start somewhere in Europe. But it has to end, or it does end, in Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain. So Santiago de Compostela is the place where the Apostle St. James is buried. And since his grave was discovered in 822 or 824 AD, pilgrims have been going to this burial site. So in the Middle Ages, and I'm talking about the 1200s, 1300s, even 1400s, it was a huge pilgrimage route. And there were three big pilgrimages that the Christians would make. It would be to Rome, to Jerusalem, or to Santiago de Compostela. So thousands of pilgrims in the Middle Ages would walk out their front door and walk or ride horseback or go in a cart or whatever, all the way from wherever their home was to northwest Spain. And now, starting about the 1400s, then the situation changed. Plagues, wars, the Reformation, pilgrimage numbers dropped off. So, from many thousands of pilgrims annually in 1300, let's say, by the time I learned about the Camino in 1972, only a few hundred were making the pilgrimage. But for reasons that we could talk about, there was, after all of a sudden, a big explosion of interest in the Camino. And the year before COVID, more than 300,000 people walked the Camino. And that's an underestimate because that's only the people who bothered to go and register their journey, their pilgrimage, and receive what's called a Compostela, which is the certificate saying you've officially done the Camino. So, to go on the second part of your question, I had read about the Camino de Santiago way back in the early 1970s in a book by James Michener called Iberia. And chapter 13 was all about the Camino. Now, back in 1970, no one was really walking the Camino, and he certainly didn't. He was driven there by his wealthy Spanish friends. And he wrote about it, and he walked a small segment just to see what it felt like to walk this route. But that his chapter piqued my interest, and I thought, I want to do that. But back in the 70s, I was young, poor, and had to work. So I didn't do it. But it was in the back of my mind always, someday I want to do the Camino. So when I was retiring, finally, I said, okay, this is going to be my first long trip. And it was. And I set out with no intention of writing a book. But you have many long days of just walking and thinking, and parts of the Camino are still pretty empty. So you have a lot of time to think. I kept thinking, I wish somebody had told me this, or I wish somebody had warned me about that. And after my Camino, when I was back home, I thought, I'm going to write those things so that people know those things. And that evolved into a book, which is both a how to, that is, if you're thinking about the Camino, here's some things you should take into consideration, and also a memoir because it incorporates my day-to-day journal of my own Camino, which I'd kept a journal along the way. So I didn't plan to write it, but it just emerged. It wanted to be born. So it was.
Well, we have a copy of that we can put up here on the screen real quick. There it goes. It's kind of an unusual cover because it's got a lot of stuff, and I know there's a little bit of a story behind that. So let's talk about your cover.
Well, I knew what I wanted. I wanted something that was going to be a mosaic because Spain's mosaics are incredibly beautiful. But I'm not a visual artist, so I needed someone to design it for me. So I hired a Spanish graphic artist and who's a book designer, and he made the framework, which I really like. And then he started plugging in pictures, and I would say, okay, I like this one, I don't like this one, I like this one, I don't like this one. And the one we got, well, let me just say that the top left corner, you see that's the feet and the arrow. So most people walk the Camino and they follow the yellow arrows, which are the guide marks to how you get to Santiago de Compostela. So I wanted that one. And then the next one down, which is the blue door with all the shells. The shell is the symbol of the Camino. So I thought that was beautiful. And then below the shells are the walking sticks. And all pilgrims almost are carrying a shell and a walking stick. Then the bottom picture is the stained glass windows of the cathedral at Leon. They're the most beautiful, incredible stained glass windows, if you like that you can see. Now, the windows at Chartres Cathedral in France are very famous. I've seen those and they're beautiful, but I want to tell you the stained glass windows at Leon are every bit as beautiful and not nearly as well known. So then going up the right-hand side, we have the yellow scallop shell, which is a symbol of the Camino. And then I insisted I wanted an image of something besides walking. Almost every book on the Camino shows a single person all by himself walking a lonely trail. And yes, probably the majority of pilgrims do that, but you don't have to do that. And so I have this picture of this bus right in front of the cathedral at Santiago. So it's kind of heresy, but the point of view expressed in my book is that doing the Camino is worth it. It doesn't matter how you do it. If you walk, if you bicycle, if you ride a horse, which are the 3 accepted ways, or if you rent a car and drive it, or you go on a bus or a train or whatever. The thing is to experience it. For me, it's the experience, not the physical walking, that makes the difference. For other people, they think the walking is what makes the Camino. Not for me. I love the churches. I love the art, the architecture, and the history. So the top right picture is the one we had the most arguments over, the graphic artist and I. He kept sending me things like he sent me a jarra, a pitcher of sangria, which I love. But the way it's set out, I can only see half the picture. I thought it looked horrible. People would say, "What is that?" So, and I'd say, "No, not that." He'd send me so, I kept saying, "Why don't you just put a plate of, a platter of paella, which is probably the best known Spanish food." He said, "Oh, that's so trite. That's so common." I said, "We're writing for non-Spaniards who don't know as much about Spain as you might think they do." So finally he said, "I give in," and he put the paella up in the top right corner. So I wanted these different images to express what I think my book is about. It's not about how you get there, whether you're walking or riding a bus. It is about the culture, whether it's the food, whether it's the architecture and art as by the stained glass windows, whether it's the history, which the walking sticks and the scallop shells signify. So I loved my cover, but the interesting thing again for me is when I got the image and I showed it to my 2 staffers at the time, they both hated it. And so I said, "I don't care. I like it. This is the cover." And since then, I've had a lot of people who say they like it. So I think I made a good choice.
We run into all sorts of people on the Camino. One of the most memorable experiences I had was a woman with 5 kids. And she was walking, and the kids, I think the youngest one was she had to carry the baby most of the time. But as a kid herself, her parents took her on the Camino de Santiago in a particular VW bus. Well, later on in life, she was able to actually find that same VW bus, had it renovated. She grew her family. I think the oldest is 6 or 7, 8, something like that. But her husband, they would spend the night in the bus. Her husband would drive to the next location, wherever that was, 10 miles, 15 miles, whatever it was. He would drive there, and then the family would walk to wherever the car was. Well, he would get out of the car, lock it up, and then join them and then walk the rest of the way. So he was dropping them in the morning. They would spend the night in the bus. The next day they would walk. He would join them back, and then as a family, they would continue walking. And I just thought that was a really interesting way of doing the Camino. And I'm looking at the clock, and we're just about midway through. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for a commercial break here. And then we're going to pick it up again, and we're going to go back into your books and publishing.
Ever dreamed of hosting your own TV show, sharing your story with a global audience? Now's your chance to shine. At USA Global TV and Radio, we make it easy for you to create, host, and broadcast your very own TV show. Whether you're a storyteller, entrepreneur, or industry expert, we help you bring your vision to life. With our exclusive interview, live streaming, and podcasting training, you'll gain the skills and confidence to captivate your audience. Our global platform ensures your voice is heard worldwide. Join our community of creators who are already making an impact, one show at a time. Step into the spotlight. Host your own TV show on USA Global TV and Radio. Book your discovery call today at usaglobaltv.com. Copyright 2025 USA Global TV and Radio. All rights reserved. Terms and conditions apply. To learn more, visit usaglobaltv.com.
USA Global TV and Radio proudly presents Steve Klein Art at steveklein.art.
My name is Steve Klein, born Manchester, England, 1953. My quest in my lifetime is to create artwork from my soul and the deepness within my wildest dreams and fantasies. In 2012, my heart stopped when I was given too much anesthetic for a minor knee operation, and this near-death experience took me to another multi-dimensional world, an out-of-body experience, and I was given the gift of being blessed by an overwhelming, burning passion to become, for the very first time in my life, an artist with an eternal, passionate desire to bring my art, which I've named multi-dimensional, subliminal, freeform art, to the world, as only 3% recover from what I experienced, and now in my golden years want to release my cosmic, vital energy through my art to allow people to be a part of my cosmic dance.
To learn more, email roccogoodwine@gmail.com. For VIP pricing, mention USA Global TV and Radio.
Hi, red-olaughlin here. We're on the Corner Bookstore on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. And my guest today is Julie Connor, author, publisher. So let's get back to Julie and continue our journey down her author career. And I know you finished the first book, it won an award. You went back and you actually took the Camino again more recently on a horseback, which I think is extremely fascinating. And then you also wrote another second book, A Baby with Three Families from Two Countries, One Promise, or some combination thereof. So let's talk about wrapping up the Camino book. It won an award, and then you went back and rode the Camino on a horseback, and then you wrote another book. So let's kind of go down that path for a short while.
Well, yes, my first book won 5 awards, including an award for the cover. So that made me very happy that an expert on covers thought that the cover was well chosen. The second book that I want to write, but frankly, I'm a terrible procrastinator, and I've spent a lot of time on other people's books in the last couple of years. But I am going to write a much shorter book about riding the Camino. It's a totally different experience. And it's not for the traditional pilgrim who wants to walk and thinks that that's the essence of the pilgrimage, which I don't. So I'm going to write a book about what it's like to ride the Camino. So that was my second book. But I did that after I actually wrote my second book. My second book was a COVID book. I was trapped in my house like everybody else was, unable to do what I wanted to do for my second book, which was to ride the Camino. So I sat around thinking, what can I write that doesn't require any travel or research? And I thought about a book that I had wanted to have back in the early 90s when I adopted my son. I tried to get a book about adoption to read to him, and I couldn't find anything like I was looking for. So I ended up writing a little book for him, which I would read to him at night. When I adopted my son, it's interesting. When you're a parent, you don't have to take any classes or any training in being a parent. But if you adopt, at least where I was, which was overseas, we had to take parenting classes for adoption. So I learned quite a bit. And one of the things was tell your child from the earliest age that they are adopted and explain what that means and tell them that they are a chosen child and much loved, which is, of course, true. So anyway, there I am in COVID thinking, I wonder if anyone ever wrote that book that I wished I'd had back then. And now, fast forward 30 years, and of course, there's the Amazon and internet and all that. So I researched it on Amazon, and there still was no book like the one that I thought adoptive parents could use to read to their child, their young child. And so there wasn't. Now there's some very cute little books for adoption for children, but they're not what I was looking for. So we could talk about how my book is different if you're interested.
Absolutely. And we can pop up the cover also so people can see it.
So those cute little books I'm talking about, and they're wonderful little books, but they're all based on animal characters. So let's say a mother elephant will adopt a stork or something. That's one aspect. The second aspect is they almost all only focus on the adopting mother and the baby or the child. That's not what I wanted. I wanted a book that was based on human characters. I wanted a book that explained the full range of people involved. Everybody from the consul who has to give the baby a visa to the family dog, the grandparents, everyone. And most importantly, I think for the children, their burning question often is, why didn't my mommy want me? So I try in the book to explain the biological mother's feelings and how important it is for her to allow her child to have a good start in life. So I ended up writing this book and publishing it, and it is still the only book of its kind on the market. There are no other books like this. And the most important thing for me, frankly, is that in the back of the book, I tell parents this is not the Bible. This is a book for you to use with your child. Theoretically, the book is for pre-readers. So you can change the name when you're reading it. You can substitute your own child's name for the name of the child in the book. You can put your dog's name instead of the dog's name in the book. You can change everything. I have a flag for an unknown country, a non-existent country. You can paste the flag of the country from which your child was adopted into the book. You can make whatever changes you want. You can rip out a page. If your child was not adopted internationally, but locally, domestically, then just rip those pages out and don't even read them. It's not necessary. But it's a guide for parents to use to talk about this subject with their adopted child. And sometimes it's really hard for parents to talk about it. You know, in the past, let's go back a ways. Many times parents didn't tell their children that they were adopted. And of course, no, nowadays that's no longer possible. With DNA, family secrets are all coming out.
As an author, we go through many different phases of our writing, and one of them is editing. And you've had an experience in writing and other things. Did you find editing to be any easier with your background experience, or was that something that you had to rely on somebody else to help you?
No, I've done all the principal editing for the 4 books I've published. I'm an English major, and I think I'm probably a better editor than I am a writer, and I'm best a reader. I'm a reader, really, reading is my thing. But I edited my first book. I had a second editor too to check what I'd done and to make suggestions, and we would get into arguments about crazy things, periods and commas and quotation marks. So I had to adopt a style guide as my company style guide, which we chose the Chicago Manual of Style, which, if you know it, is about this thick and covers just about everything you can imagine. So it became, when we would have these discussions about editing, I would say, he first was my associate editor. He would say, well, if you look at the Chicago Manual of Style, page blankety blankety blank, you will see that. And I would have to concede the point. But quickly I realized all I had to do was take the Chicago Manual Style and go back to him and say, well, but if you look at page XYZ, you'll see that in this circumstance. Anyway, so I'm a pretty good editor. Having said that, the most recent book I published was actually a translation. of an Italian novel, which was published in Italy in 2020 and has won numerous awards in Italy. And uh, editing a translated document was quite a challenge, more than I thought it was going to be. So I spent many, many, many hours on that book because it could be correct. Well, first of all, a lot of it was not correct grammatical English, but if it was correct grammatical English, it might sound stilted or it might not sound like that particular character. So you have to, then it's negotiating with the author. For example, when two friends were talking, I thought we should be using English with contractions. He didn't want contractions. He just wanted plain English, no contractions. He's the author, so I accepted his rule, his desire, and I took all the contractions. Having corrected it to contractions, I had to go back and uncorrect it to put it back no contractions. So it was a lot of work. But I think the translated copy in English, in my opinion, is even better than the Italian version. And if you want to, I can tell you why. But it was quite a big mountain to climb to get that book published.
Well, editing is one of several things that we as writers, authors, have to go through that phase. But one of the ones that we typically don't have experience in is marketing. We have our book, we don't tell anybody about it, we publish it, and now all of a sudden we want to tell the world. And in reality, had we told the world when we started writing, we would already have an audience following us. So when did you start marketing your books with regard to when you started writing your books?
Marketing is the most difficult part of publishing as far as I'm concerned nowadays. Maybe not for the big five traditional publishers, but for a small publisher like me, it is hard. It is hard to get attention. It is hard to get anyone to talk about your book, which is why I really appreciate, Red, you're inviting me on your show. It's hard to get people's eyes on your books. So I did not start way ahead of time. I know they advise that, but I'm always very cautious. And suppose I say I'm going to publish this book this year, watch for it, and then I don't get it published. I mean, I would have fallen into that trap a couple of times so far. I'm actually better and I keep more to the task when I'm working on someone else's books than on my own books. So,
And
yes.
that's something interesting because I think a lot of us fall in that same one. We value other people's priorities a little higher than we value our own sometime. And when you have that book, okay, I want it as a paperback, I want it as an ebook, and then somebody says, "Oh, why not have it as a hardcover?" Well, I don't know about that. Or why not have it as an audiobook? Have you given any? I know you have a hardback cover on at least one of your books, but do you have an audiobook out there?
I do. Savoring the Camino de Santiago is an audiobook. And so for my first book, I tried everything. I have a hardcover, I have an ebook, I have a paperback, and I have an audiobook. So the only format I don't have is large print. But I wanted to experiment with all that. I know from my own son, the younger generation is more inclined to listen to a book when they're jogging or walking or driving or whatever than they are to actually read a book. So I wanted to explore that market, and I personally don't have the technical expertise that I felt I could read the book myself. So I went through the process of interviewing and then hiring a reader to do my audiobook. And I'm pretty happy with the result. It required some work too because I'd asked in the specifications for someone who was bilingual or who spoke good Spanish. And the person who I hired said yes. But then when I listened to the interview, the reading, some Spanish words were being mispronounced, and so those had to be corrected. Anyway, but it was a learning experience. That's one thing about this whole publishing journey is you're constantly learning new things every day.
Well, speaking of learning new things, have you been using AI for anything at all in your writings?
I haven't. I haven't used it for anything. Let me just say, last night I was at a program, very interesting program with the author Justin Cronin, and he talked about AI, and he really is down on AI, if I can summarize it that way. And I think I am too, because I'm afraid as a writer and a publisher, AI is going to perhaps put writers out of business too. It's put out a lot of different professions out of business, and it might put us out of business. Now, some people say no, the creative spark also always has to come from somewhere, but you can pretty much give a prompt to AI and it will churn out something. So I consider it dangerous as far as creativity in writing.
I think I've used it for cover design to settle in on a particular cover that I can send to a designer. I've used it for a lot of my research where I want to, what do I not know? And then I take and create, okay, let me go delve into that. So I've used it not as extensively as I want, but I use it as a tool. And I found out there's only certain ways you can, there's many ways to ask a question to AI, but if you don't ask it the right way, you're going to get, if it's stupid in, it's stupid out. You have to know exactly what you want. And the first experience I ever had was edit. I put in 5 pages of one chapter and I got 2 paragraphs back. I learned okay, that's not the right word to use. So I have about 3 or 4 sentences that I use now when I want to edit something that's extensive, where it really does at least meet the same criteria as edit in my brain that it does in real life. And but you have to be very, very careful. It's a tool, and you have to use it accordingly. But we're getting toward the end of the
Well,
show, and Judy,
Red, can I just say one thing? I said I'm talking about AI, but I'm really talking about more creative, asking it to write something for you. I
okay,
use AI a lot. If you're talking about a program like Grammarly,
hmm,
which is an editing program, that's fine. I mean, they help you. They point out if you've overlooked the fact you have two periods after at the end of a sentence.
yeah,
Just uh, mechanical and technical and even grammatical things that will help you focus in on something. That's all fine. But what I'm objecting to is when you ask AI to write your essay or
yeah.
to write your novel or to write your whatever.
Totally different world for authors. We don't want that. Give me some thoughts. I'll take them and run with them, research them and do them, but don't write for me in my name. So I think we're both in agreement on that. Getting toward the end of the show, how can people get your books? How can they contact you for any event coming up? What's going on in your life that you want to share with the audience?
Well, they can contact me at publishing at bayoucitypress.com. And I'm readily available. You can go to either the bayoucitypress.com website or my personal website, which is Julie Connor Author website, Julie Connor Author. And I welcome people to send me proposals if they have manuscripts they'd like to get published. But let me give a caveat. I focus on travel, history, international affairs, and Houston related. So I love poetry, but I'm not going to publish poetry. I don't consider myself competent to edit poetry, so I'm not going to take a poetry manuscript. But anyway, all the submission requirements are on my website. That is bayoucitypress.com for anyone who might want to send me a manuscript.
Okay, so Julie, Julie, Connor, Connor, author.com for our audio audience. And for Bayou City, it's BAYOUCITY press, PRESS, no dashes, no periods, anything.com. So those are the two primary ways to reach Julie. And I really and truly appreciate your time today. And I'm sure we're going to bump into each other here in the not too distant future. So take care.
Thank you, Red. Great to see you.
Okay. Catch you later. Very shortly, in less than a minute, we're going to be switching out the ending this particular show here on the Corner Bookstore. My next show here on the USA Global TV and Radio Network is called The Wise Ones. My guest today is John Mahaffey. He was a golfer back from about 73 to 99, professional golfer, won well over a dozen events. He's also written some books, and he's a motivational speaker. He's a lot of things. My first professional golfer that I'm having on my show, so I'm looking forward to that. So please join me for that. And immediately following that one on my other show today, I do 3 in a row. Talking Heads is what would I do is my primary focus. And today I'm talking about light therapy, primarily red light therapy. So Please join me if you can. If not, catch us on YouTube, on USA Global TV, on the archives. Bye, you all, and catch you next week. Bye now.
In a world full of noise, misunderstandings, and interruptions, master the art of listening with Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck is the listening mentor of USA Global TV and Radio and the Amazon #1 best-selling author of Mastering the Power of Elevated Listening. Elevate your listening. Elevate your life. Join a global learning experience in person or via Zoom. Reserve your spot today. usaglobaltv.com/book-your-session or drjacqueline.thinkific.com. Join Dr. Kerbeck's listening courses or hire her to unlock deeper connections and authentic conversations. Have you ever felt unheard? Like your words float into a void, leaving you invisible and disconnected? How about feeling judged, when assumptions overshadow your truth, leaving you misunderstood and defensive? And then there's that moment when someone offers solutions you never asked for, dismissing your feelings and leaving you more frustrated than before. It doesn't have to be this way. Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck, the listening mentor, understands. She's here to help you reclaim your voice, build stronger connections, and create meaningful conversations that inspire understanding and mutual respect. Through her groundbreaking books, online and in-person courses, and interactive workshops, you'll learn how to navigate life's most challenging interactions. Discover the power of elevated listening and transform how you communicate. Master setting boundaries and asking permission to protect your peace. Learn to recognize and release judgment, fostering empathy and true connection. Dr. Kerbeck also offers personalized coaching, one-on-one or group sessions designed to fit your unique needs. Whether in person or virtually on StreamYard, her guidance will empower you to thrive. You don't have to struggle alone. The path to deeper connections and better relationships start here. Visit drjacqueline.com or usaglobaltv.com. Join a global community of empowered listeners and transform your life, one meaningful conversation at a time. Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck is the listening mentor. Start your journey today. Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honored to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USAGlobalTV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning, and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, we're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Music by Johnny Dies. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative Direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Copyright 2025. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.